I don't know about you, but I'm feeling chapter 22. Why? Because this is the last chapter of the course. Congratulations for making it here. Stop for just a second and reflect on how awesome you are. There you go. Now that you're prepared, we go on to the aorist tense, active and middle voice. And of course, as we've been all semester, we are in the indicative mood. Here are our key terms we'll encounter. Aorist tense, you'll see that there are two kinds of aorist, a first aorist and a second aorist. And we'll look at the aspect, which would be undefined for this tense, and then something called punctiliar action. This is just a little extra thing that will be there in the book. Okay, the past tense in English. You can form a continuous past by adding was or were. And then we also have a completed past formed by adding usually ed if it's a regular verb, or by altering the root if it's an irregular verb. So two past tenses, two different aspects, continuous and completed. So to form the completed past, adding ed, we get study in the present, studied in the past. But if it's an irregular verb, we go eat to ate, bring to brought. Greek, like English, has more than one kind of past tense. The imperfect tense, as we've seen, describes a continuous action occurring in the past. That is an action with past time, but continuous aspect. The aorist tense, which we're introducing now, describes a completed or undefined action occurring in the past. So past time, completed or undefined aspect. Completed and undefined are really just two different labels for the same thing. Let's review translation of each of the Greek tenses. A Greek present tense will be translated into English using the helping verb is or am or are. So I am, you are, he, she, it is. A Greek future will be translated in English using the helping verb will. A Greek imperfect will be translated using was or were. And the Greek aorist will be translated using the suffix ed or by using the irregular past form, as in eat to ate. Let's set the imperfect and the aorist side by side. Imperfect agapon, I was loving. Imperfect continuous. Elegon, I was saying. Imperfect and continuous. And I've provided here an image that's intended to picture for you what the imperfect tense is doing. It's an action that begins in the past and that continues in the past with no indication that it stopped or when it has stopped. So continuous action. The aorist, agapisa, I loved. This is a first aorist, past tense, but simply completed or undefined aspect. The action occurred, but not necessarily continuously. Apon, I said. This is a second aorist form, also past tense, completed or undefined aspect. So notice that there is a distinction here between the first and the second aorist. That distinction is really a distinction in form. These two types of aorist are formed differently. There is typically no difference in meaning. Sometimes there is. There are some verbs that can take either a first or a second aorist form with slight difference in meaning. But for now, think of them as being the same in meaning, but different in form. In this chapter, we'll be focusing on the second aorist form. And now below I have here simply a dot to show you what undefined aspect looks like. It's an action that occurred in the past, not necessarily at a point in time, but it's an action conceived as having occurred as a whole, saying nothing else about its structure or how long that action occurred. Now, there's no better way to teach the difference between the imperfect and the aorist than to appeal to the great grammarian Taylor Swift. Her song Blank Space, I believe, has a subliminal message that actually illustrates the difference. Listen closely to her song, Blank Space. Check this out. The aorist is completed, the imperfect is continuous, but they're both done in the past time. I love Greek, can't get enough. I think that there's a layer, a subtext underneath that external layer of blank space where these are actually the words uttered. The aorist is completed, imperfect is continuous, but they're both done in the past time. I love Greek, can't get enough. Got a long list of Greek tenses, they'll tell you I'm insane. Well, you get the idea. That's the difference. The aorist is completed, the imperfect is continuous, but they're both past tense or past time verbs. So how do we form this? Recall that verbs have principal parts. The first principal part is the present active indicative. The second principal part is the future active indicative. And now you know what the third principal part is used for, the aorist active indicative. You see also with genomai, genesomai, agonamein. Okay, so formation of the second aorist active. The return of the augment. Just as the imperfect uses an augment, so does the aorist. But now we'll use the aorist active tense stem, which comes from the third principal part, and then a connecting vowel, and, as with the imperfect, secondary active personal endings. Remember that if the tense is in the past time, it will use an augment and it will use secondary endings. There's your augment. The augment epsilon, recall E for earlier. The augment means it's in a past tense. Formation of the second aorist middle. Exactly the same with one exception. Now we use secondary middle passive personal endings. So augment, aorist stem from the third principal part, connecting vowel, and your secondary middle passive personal endings. Now remember the rules for the augment. Typically an augment simply consists of the addition of epsilon to the beginning of a word with smooth breathing. So luo when the imperfect became eluon. Echo became acon because of contraction when the epsilon was added. Alternatively, if the verb begins with a vowel, you lengthen the vowel to indicate the augment. You could also lengthen the first vowel or leave it unchanged where a verb begins with a diphthong. Eucharisteo to Eucharistun, airo to aaron, now subscripting the iota if you notice. Add an epsilon between the prefix and simple verb or lengthen the vowel when you have a compound verb consisting of a preposition plus a verb. So kata bino consisting of the preposition kata plus the verb bino, we augment between the preposition and the verb usually. Occasionally, the preposition itself will be augmented as if it were an essential part of the verb and not a prepositional prefix. Let's review our 4 sets of personal endings. We have a primary active set, and one of our favorites, the primary middle passive set. Mai, sai, tai, methistat, and tai. Mai, sai, tai, methistat, and tai. All past tenses will use the secondary personal ending. So here's the secondary active, and now the secondary middle passive. Main sa ta, methistat, nta. Main sa ta, methistat, nta. Main sa ta, methistat, nta. Not sure exactly how many seconds that took, but your study sessions can sometimes be so short. The amount of time it takes to say these things can be done at any interval during the day. So here's the complete paradigm for the second aorist active indicative of lambano. Now, why are we not using luo? The reason we're not using luo is because this chapter covers the second aorist formation, not the first. Luo has a first aorist formation pattern. Lambano has a second aorist formation pattern. Hence the change. So again, one easy way to do this as you practice is to divide the parts of the word. Begin with your stem, which you've gotten from the third principal part, Add your augment to the beginning, and then add your secondary active personal endings using connecting vowel omicron before mu or nu, and epsilon before everything else. The second aorist middle indicative of Ginamai. Same thing. Separate the parts of the word if that's helpful to you. But what I want to point out is what's happened here in the second person singular. If the endings are main sa ta, methystatin ta, how do we end up with omicron upsilon? Well, again, we have that intervocalic sigma smothered to death between two vowels, which then contract, giving you omicron upsilon. So when we translate the aorist, again, we want to make it simple past. Eleben un tus artus ha Jesus, then Jesus took the bread. Not Jesus was taking the bread, as the imperfect would indicate. And then in the middle, kai agenita galene megale, and a great calm occurred. Notice how Ginamai inherently has a middle meaning. Occurring isn't really an active act, but occurring can't be passive either. So this stands somewhere in between, indicating something like a state of being, hence the middle. Okay, to review quickly the paradigm words we've had, because we've had quite a few. We use luo when we can. When we can't use luo for some reason or another, we'll substitute another suitable word. For the present middle, we need erkamai because luo isn't so-called deponent in the middle. The future middle, we use poruamai because erkamai does not have the same form in the future. And the second aorist active, now we need lambano because this verb has a second aorist, whereas luo does not. And then ginamai for the second aorist middle. Okay, here's the master verb chart given in mounts, transformed into a much more beautiful thing, I must say. Continue to memorize this. I think it's a very helpful summary of how to form the conjugations. You notice each column shows you what component of the verb you need in its formation. These are the tenses that have the augment. You notice the epsilon in that column. Here it tells you which tense stem to use, in other words, which principal part to go from, the tense formative, the connecting vowel, and which set of personal endings to use. Very nice little tool. So let's go over our vocabulary. Repeat after me. Apathnesko, Artas, Balo, Gay, Ginamai, Acerkamai, Exerkamai, Eti, Heurisco, Lambano, Uta, Proserkamai, Proseukamai, Poor. Congrats. Closing in on 80%. Not bad.